Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, also known as the Midwest, there lived a boy named James Gatz. He was very poor, lived on a farm, and his parents didn't really care about him. It would have been better if he had evil stepsisters, but you can't have everything. As James Gatz grew up, he had big aspirations. He went to college, but it was demeaning that he had to work, so he quit. Jay spent a while wandering aimlessly before he met his fairy godfather, Dan Cody. Dan Cody took him on his magic carpet yacht and showed him the world. Unfortunately, an evil witch, Cody's wife Ella, murdered Cody and took the money left to Gatz. Gatz had learned a lot about being rich from Dan Cody, so he changed his name to Jay Gatsby to symbolically get rid of the old him. Later, he joined the army, and that's where he met his princess. He went to her house, at first with other officers from Camp Taylor, and then alone. Daisy was beautiful, popular, and rich, which are all good qualities in a princess because personality doesn't matter. They fell in love, but unfortunately, Gatsby had no castle since he was still poor, so shallow Princess Daisy couldn't marry him after all. Off he went to war in Europe, where he proved to be heroic and a good exaggerator. He became captain and was in command of the divisional machine guns. Later, he tells Nick about all the fantastic awards he got. After all, a prince needs to be accomplished. Not that Daisy probably cares. He finishes the war with high hopes of marrying the love of his life. Just like the fairy tale, he knew her for exactly how long before he decided she was the one, but in a cruel twist of fate, he is sent to Oxford instead of back to Daisy. Meanwhile, the ungrateful Daisy moves on and marries another suitably rich person. At some point, Gatsby realizes that he has passed up a chance at an excellent education for a princess who seems pretty uninterested. But she's his princess and he's incredibly devoted, so he makes a whole bunch of money so she will want him. Legally? Probably not. He stalks her and collects newspapers about her. Creepy. During this stalking, he figures out where she lives and buys his castle across the water from her. Perhaps she will be awakened to their love with a true love's kiss? The metaphorical thorn bushes surrounding Sleeping Beauty, perhaps the water, are guarded by a very real dragon named Tom. Since he can't get past the thorn bushes, the prince instead decides to throw lavish parties in the hopes that one day Daisy will attend. An incredibly rational decision, I assure you. He also stares at her dock light for hours. A whole bunch of famous people come to his parties, but still no Daisy. At about this time, an aspiring bond seller named Nick buys a cottage next to Gatsby. Gatsby invited him to a party and, through possibly more stalking, learns that Nick knows Daisy. This is where the whole convoluted plan to meet Daisy through the mutual friend Nick is born. I just want to emphasize that none of this is at all creepy. Gatsby takes Nick out for lunch so that he could get indirectly closer to his princess. Gatsby tries to prove his worth by telling Nick of his adventures in the war and at Oxford. They meet Gatsby's business partner, who has previously been involved in criminal actions. Not suspicious at all. However, Gatsby disappears pretty quickly when Tom is introduced.
Nick agrees to invite Daisy over for tea without telling her Gatsby's gonna be there. Deception is always the best plan. Gatsby is beyond nervous. The love at first sight thing is taking a while when Daisy comes, so Nick reminds Gatsby not to abandon his courage and honor. Then Gatsby stops being so awkward and they finally get to the falling in love part. Daisy apologizes for marrying Tom and they're all set to live happily ever after. When Nick comes back, Daisy wants to show them his castle. He takes them through with barely taking his eyes off Daisy. He reevaluated everything he owns by the amounts of excitement it brought to Daisy. While Killsbringer plays the piano, Nick left Daisy and Gatsby alone. Tom and Mr. and Mrs. Sloane stopped by Gatsby's place to have a drink. Gatsby was very nervous having Daisy's husband over, but he invites the group to dinner nonetheless. They refuse, but the lady with Mr. Sloane invites him to her party. Nobody wants him though, so when he accepts, they leave without him. Rude. Tom takes Daisy to one of Gatsby's parties, but she doesn't really have much fun since Tom's there. Tom hits on some girls. Gatsby is devastated that Daisy doesn't like his parties, and he decides to not have any more. The only fun Daisy had was when she was alone with Gatsby. Then one day, Gatsby gets invited to lunch inside the evil castle inhabited by Tom. This would be fine, except it's so hot they decide to go into town instead. There, Tom figures out that not only is his wife in love with Gatsby, but then his mistress is leaving. Then there's a whole argument where shallow Daisy can't make up her mind and she can't say she never loved Tom. Daisy is driving Gatsby's car home when Myrtle runs out into the street and Daisy hits her. Gatsby is so fully infatuated that he decides to cover for Daisy so she doesn't have to take the blame. However, ungrateful Daisy goes straight back to Tom. Meanwhile, Tom figures out that Myrtle is dead and thinks Gatsby is the one who killed her. Gatsby is devastated and spends the whole night hanging around outside her house, just hoping that Tom will beat her up so that he can rescue her and then they can live happily ever after. Unfortunately, Tom does seem to care about Daisy a little, so she makes it through the night unscratched. Tom tells Wilson that it was Gatsby's car that hit Myrtle, so Wilson goes to find Gatsby. He then shoots and kills Gatsby before also killing himself. This could have all been avoided if Daisy decided to run away with the guy who loved her and had been obsessing over her for years. But no, instead Gatsby is dead. Nick hosts a funeral in which nobody comes, not even Daisy comes. Daisy doesn't bother to go to the funeral of the guy who sacrificed his life for her, the guy who spent years obsessing over her. So Prince Charming is dead and everyone lives happily ever after.